Hey guys, Dr. Ryan here. This PAT preparation video is sponsored by DAT Booster, the most powerful online resource for the DAT. So the perceptual ability test is the spatial reasoning portion of the dental admissions test. And I want us to tackle the PAT like a series of games. And we're going to unpack different strategies that you can use to win and confidently win these games. So the PAT has 90 questions in total and is made up of 6 subsections that appear in order with 15 questions each. And you'll have 60 minutes total to answer all of those questions. So there are 2 necessities when studying for the PAT. Number 1 is pure practice. Do as many practice questions as you can. And I strongly recommend checking out DAT Booster. I'll leave a link in the description for them. And the second necessity when studying for the PAT is finding strategies that work for you. So my goal with these videos is to present a bunch of strategies, and my hope is that one or more of them will stick with you so that you can be confident on test day with how you'll approach every single problem. You'll know exactly what to expect and exactly the steps that you'll take personally to solve each and every problem. So with that, let's get started. In this video, we'll cover the keyholes section, also called apertures. Like all sections, it has 15 questions, and for this one, I recommend about 50 seconds per question for a total of 12.5 minutes on this section. So for each keyhole question on the PAT, you're presented with a 3D object and must determine which of the 5 provided openings in the answer choices would allow the object to pass through with a perfect fit. Now, the object can pass through the opening in any orientation, but it can't be rotated or twisted around while it's passing through. The external outline of the object must be the exact shape and size of the opening without being too big or too small or having extra protrusions. So in this example, this 3D object could probably fit through a couple of these holes, but only the correct answer is an exact fit. So this is the list of rules for this game, and many of these we've already talked about. Rule number 1 says that prior to passing through the aperture, the irregular solid object may be turned in any direction, and it may be started through the aperture on a side not shown. So in other words, you can manipulate the object in any way so that it enters the hole via top to bottom, front to back, or side to side. But once it's started through the aperture, it must be pushed through absolutely straight, and well, that's exactly what rule number 2 says, that once the object is started through, it may not be twisted or turned around. Rule number 3 says that both the 3D object and the correct keyhole are drawn to the same scale. Thus, it's possible for an opening to be the correct shape, but too small for the object or too big for it. However, in all cases, those differences are large enough to see by eye. Rule number 4 says that there are no irregularities in any hidden portion of the object, which means that the parts that we cannot see don't have any crazy protrusions. There can't be any jagged edges or extensions back where we can't see, like on this surface or behind this extension, for example. Also, it says that symmetric indentations are always going to be symmetric in the hidden portion with the part shown. So in other words, if we have something like this hole or tunnel, this is an indentation, but we can't see what's going on over here. Well, we have to assume that that tunnel continues through the entire object. They wouldn't try to trick you by saying this tunnel stops halfway through and the rest is just a solid box. They can't do that because that involves some sort of guesswork. Similarly, another example here is this L shape right here. We can see clearly what's happening up here, but we don't know what happens behind here. Does it transition into a slope, or does that L portion go away and it just becomes a tall block? Well, again, take the guesswork out. That indentation is going to continue through the back of the shape where we can't see. So essentially, again, rule number 4 takes out any possible guesswork for a shape and can help us fill in the gaps where those hidden portions are. And then number 5, which is true for every question of the exam, for each object there's only one correct answer. There will only be one correct answer of the choices. Alright, so test strategy number 1 is to visualize the object from the top, front, and end views. Now the next section of the PAT, called top, front, end, is exactly the opposite. So in Keyholes, we essentially break down a three-dimensional object into top, front, and end views in our head. In top, front, end, we build up a 3D object in our mind from the provided two-dimensional top, front, and end views. So keyholes and top, front, end are intimately related, and as you get better with one, you get better with the other. So how can we break down a three-dimensional object into its component views? Well, there are a lot of different methods, and like I said before, I'm going to be sharing all the strategies that I know of, and you can decide for yourself which one works best for you. So the first thing we can do is to use shadows. So it would be like visualizing the shadow that an object will create if you shine a light from above, from the front, and from the side, and what kind of shadow that would project on walls that are positioned behind the object, like you can see here. So we can do this because there are only 3 possible ways an object can enter the hole. It can't be diagonal, for instance. It has to be from top, bottom, front, back, or left, right sides. So another way to do this is to imagine what would happen if you were to flatten or crush the object relative to the top, bottom, front, back, and left, right sides. So if you stomp on a soda can, for instance, from top to bottom, you're left with a circular disc. Or if you smash it from the side, you have a flat rectangle. And these would be exactly the correct apertures for that cylindrical 3D object. Sometimes I like to think what this object would look like if I was physically up here looking down at it, physically in front, like if I was riding the magic school bus, for instance, and could view the object from that way. A last method is visualizing using a bottle of spray paint or shining a beam of colored light at the object and imagining which surfaces would get colored and which ones would be left out from each of these 3 views. So this is the method, or I should say these 2 are the methods that I'll expound upon in the next few practice problems, but feel free to use any of these mental tools when you practice yourself. So for almost every problem, you can use this method of spray painting to help study and break down your practice questions. You can imagine shining a light of a particular color or spray painting with a particular color from one direction at a time. So essentially you shade in the faces that would catch the spray paint and then gray out all of the planes of that object that are parallel to or blocked out from your paint. So if we're standing over here and shooting green spray paint in this direction, all of these planes that are facing the paint will catch that paint. And the ones that are up here that are positioned parallel to the spray, or ones that are back here that are blocked out from getting it, we're just going to gray those out because those don't get any paint on them. So in other words, every plane of the object that is perfectly parallel to your line of vision where you're looking from is grayed out, and they are not going to influence that keyhole. So after this step, you can translate your shading to a flat 2-dimensional image representing that view. So let's take a look at the front object just a little bit closer. So all of these rectangles here are going to combine to form one big rectangle along the base. And then we have this triangular face that's going to be painted and placed up here. And then we have a little bit of space between the triangle and the square face, which is going to be here. And then we have space on either side of those two objects because we're going to have this part of the base extend that way, and then this part of the base extend to the left, which is going to be just a little bit longer. So that's how we can piece it all together into a two-dimensional image, which will be one of our possible correct keyholes. From the end view, we have a similar idea where all of those rectangles along the bottom get painted in, and then this triangular face will get painted, and then this square face. But this time, there's no space in between them. They're perfectly lined up with each other. So they're going to be right next door to each other in the 2D image. Also notice how there's this little stair step here where that part of the shape comes out just a little bit. But don't let that throw you off because these two vertical walls, this one here and this one here, are perfectly in line if we were to rotate the object around. Just like if you're looking at a staircase, if you're looking at it straight on versus off to the side, that's the same kind of idea here. And then for the top view, the paint from this direction is going to catch by far the most real estate. So we get the full pyramid here, we get the top of the square, and we get all of this massive shape here. So this indentation up here is a little bit interesting. And remember, you always have all the information you need to solve a given PAT problem. And according to the rules, there can't be any irregularities below or behind this square. So we have to keep that in mind because otherwise we might think, well, maybe that there's something going on behind the square that we can't see, and we wouldn't be able to translate to this image. But in this case, we can because we know that at least this square and this sliver are going to catch the paint. So this part of the shape is going to be rectangular. It's going to be the square part plus that little sliver to the next of it, and then this indentation is going to be next to that cube. So once we have all of that completed, note how none of these match an answer choice perfectly in the same exact orientation. But that's okay, as long as it's the same size and the same shape. The orientation doesn't matter. We can spin these around, we can flip them around however we need to, as long as it's the same size and the same shape. All right, so with all of that information, now we can go to the answer choices and pick the correct answer. Let's look at A first. And so this one looks like an attempt at the front view. It looks similar to our green one, except that this part of the shape is a little bit too high. We know it has to be on the same level as the rest of the shape here and here. So that answer is out. B also looks like an attempt at that front view, but this time it looks like this extension and this extension are the same length. And as we talked about before, this part of the shape is longer than this part here. So that one, unfortunately, is incorrect as well. For C, the indentation is the problem. This is an attempt at the top view, but this part of the shape is not correct. We know that this part of the shape is looking pretty good because it's that rectangular shape we were looking for, but this part of the shape also has to be rectangular. This part we can easily see right here is going to be wider than it is tall. And well, that's not the case here. This looks like a pretty perfect square to me where the length and the height are the same. And so that part is incorrect. And so we have to rule out answer C as well. For answer D, this looks like an attempt at the end view, and it's very, very close, except this top extension is too short. And we know that it has to be longer in this direction, and it's just not quite there. So answer D, we can also rule out. So that leaves us with answer E. And we can see that that is another attempt at the end view, and it's perfectly lined up with the square and the triangle next to each other. The extension is the proper length, and don't let that throw you off that it's oriented differently and it's rotated and translated around. The size and the shape are exactly a perfect match for this shape entering from either the right or the left side. So the answer here is E. So when you're practicing, if it helps, you can print these problems out and color in the faces like I did, or do it in a program like Microsoft Paint. And the more you do, the better you'll get at this. So every plane of the 3D object that is parallel to your line of vision from a certain view will not influence that view. Another strategy is to try grouping together individual answer choices. I think it can be really helpful to look at groups of keyholes. There's usually one group, if not two, of similar looking keyholes in the 5 answers. So look at groups instead of individual answers and see if you can figure out what views the test makers are going for. Maybe 3 of the keyholes look like they're going for the top view, and then the other 2 are going for the front view. And if you know that, then don't even waste time trying to figure out what the end view looks like. Also, it's useful to see if any answer choices just stand out. Sometimes you have a problem where one looks off right away, and you can eliminate it fairly early. So let's apply our strategy so far to this problem. We look at the 3D object, and then we can quickly glance at the answer choices to try to group them together based on similarities. Now, you don't need to spend too much time on this part, but more just to get a general idea of what's going on. So A has this little staircase feature, which we can only see from the front view, so that's got to be a front view attempt. B and C have a flat across extension. Looks like they're going for an end view with that one, so we'll group those 2 together. And then the top view is obviously looking like D or E with that longer span, larger real estate shapes, so we're going to group those 2 together as well. And since we're practicing our spray painting technique, let's work that up for each of the 3 views. Of course, on test day, we won't be coloring and drawing out shapes because it's too time consuming and impractical, but practicing and working through each problem in this way can really improve your perceptual ability and help you to visualize these in your head on test day. So we have our front view here, and remember that every plane that is perfectly parallel to the spray paint or blocked out from other surfaces is going to get grayed out. So even if it's sloped like this one or this one that we can't see, it's not parallel to our line of vision. So they will still catch some spray paint and we still color them in. And here we have our end view and our top view as well. So now that we have our 3 views visualized, we can analyze the answer choices more closely. So for A, we have this top staircase that we noticed from the beginning, but the problem is the top part doesn't stick up high enough. It's not the same dimensions as the top part of the staircase in the actual object. It's a little too short, so we can rule that one out from the start. So B looks pretty good. We'll go back to that one in just a little bit. C looks like it's an attempt at the end view, but this part is too short once again. So C is going to get ruled out. D looks pretty good at first glance. It doesn't look like there's a whole lot wrong with it, but the problem is these 2 bottom parts of the shape should be the same length. We can see that they're approximately the same length in the actual object, and this part is too short. So that one's going to get ruled out. And for E, well, these 2 parts of the shape should be at the same level. We see that they both come out at the same distance from the rest of the shape, and so that part is incorrect here. We can rule E out. And we skipped B because that is the correct answer. All we have to do is flip this shape around 180 degrees. The end view is what they were going for here. B is the correct answer. And test strategy number 4 is something we've been doing this whole time, but I just really want to highlight this because process of elimination is really useful for keyholes and most sections on the PAT. It's a systematic approach that allows you to stay focused and get closer and closer to the correct answer. All right, now let's revisit the problem from the beginning of the video and tackle it with all of these test strategies combined. So let's spend a few seconds grouping them together. A is the only square here. It looks like it's the top view, so we're going to put that in its own group. B and D look pretty similar. They have these stair steps, and it's looking like they're going for this part where it comes up and down and up and down. That's going to be from the end or side view, so we're going to group those two together. And then C and E look pretty similar. They have this like top hat shape going on, so those two we're going to put as part of the front view attempt. So now we have quickly, within a few seconds, just grouped all our answer choices together. So now you can approach this several ways, and I usually start with the most basic of those groups. So we can either rule it in as the correct answer or rule it out as the incorrect answer the fastest. So in this example, I'd probably start looking at A because it's very simple, and you save the complex, more time-consuming views for last. Because if you were to, let's say, locate the correct answer really quickly, then you save a lot of time and don't have to bother with the more complicated views and keyholes that are given in the answers. So let's get out our spray paint and color in the different views. Now, one area I want to point out is the end view, and this is pretty tricky. Note that this slope that's sloping away from the camera is going to still catch some yellow spray paint. It's just out of our perspective. So we know that the height of this wall has to come up this high, not this high, because this slope is going to catch the spray paint because it's, again, not parallel to our line of vision from that side, and it's not blocked out from any other shapes. All right, so let's go through the answers one at a time. I'm going to start with A because it's the most simple. The shape is correct. This is an attempt at the top view, and it is going to be a perfect square. The problem is the size isn't. The size is too small, and it would have to be the width of these other shapes here. So these sizes are correct, and you can tell that this is just too small. So A is a great example of how the shape could be perfectly right, but the size is not. So that cannot be the right answer. I'm going to tackle C and E next because I would see those as the next most simple shapes. So C looks like almost exactly correct, this top hat with a little tunnel underneath. And if you're going really fast, you might select that as the correct answer. But the problem is this opening. And like we talked about before, we know the tunnel has to extend through the whole shape, so that part's right. But the shape of the opening is rectangular. It's not a square like it's shown here. So C has this opening going too high, and so that is incorrect. E would be if we didn't have rule number 4, and that tunnel might end halfway through the shape. But we know the tunnel has to extend. There has to be some opening here, and so E is ruled out as well. So we're left with looking at our most complicated view, the end view. And so we're going to look very closely at how these shapes interact with each other. We have a large rectangular base. We have a smaller layer on top of that. We're going to have a part that comes across like this on the left side, and then we're going to have a smaller extension at the top. So there's going to be some amount of irregularity in the shape. So if we compare B and D pretty closely, we can see that they're very similar, but there is a distinct difference. And it's this part right here. It's this side extension versus this side extension. Everything else is exactly the same. And so which one of those is correct? And we can see that they're talking about this part of the shape because it has that higher piece right up here. So we know that they're talking about this side of the shape. And so we can see very directly that this is how wide that extension should be. And so this looks correct. This looks too long. So the answer here is B. Alright guys, that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking the video and subscribing to my channel for more on the DAT and all things dentistry. A huge thank you to DAT Booster for making this video possible. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video.